I'm Amanda Petrusich. I'm a music journalist and college professor, and I'm the author of Do Not Sell at Any Price, a book about collectors of extraordinarily rare 78 RPM recordings. I am a kind of extraordinarily haphazard collector. I mean, I mostly just pick up things that I like, which sounds silly or maybe sounds sort of, I don't know, kind of dopily rudimentary, but I've been writing about music professionally for almost a decade. Yeah, and just kind of got the bug for it. I talk about this a little bit in the book, but a few years ago I feel like I'd gotten to a point where I felt really sort of underinvested and overwhelmed by the amount of music I had accessibility to. And at a certain point I feel like the volume of that, it almost became kind of like a disillusioning sort of force in my life. I felt like I wasn't necessarily consuming and understanding and kind of forging relationships with records the way I did when I was a kid, where I would, have to really seek things out and would spend weeks kind of memorizing every sort of note and every riff on a record. I was sort of listening to everything for a few seconds and moving on. And it was around then when I first got introduced to the whole kind of subculture of 78 RPM records and collectors of 78 RPM records. And it seemed like such a sort of convenient and handy and beautiful antidote to the oversaturation I was feeling, which was, here are these things you really have to seek out and invest a lot of time and energy and money and sort of heart into acquiring and then into digesting. And that was really appealing to me right away, just the idea that the way that I felt about music, that I could somehow almost kind of give that back, almost sort of return that energy into the search, into the hunt a little bit. This is the only Bobby Charles LP I have. I have some weird iterations of this record, some sort of import versions of it that I got before I could get my hands on this one. Arguably my favorite record, maybe of all time. I could say that right now on this particular day. I think it's a really beautiful album, sort of as heralded as it has been posthumously, maybe arguably still a little bit under-heralded. It makes me feel really awesome every time I listen to it. This was a record I've been looking for so long. It was recently reissued by Light in the Attic, but prior to that you could only get it on LP in its original pressing, and it was really, really tough to find. He recorded it in 1972 with Dr. John and a bunch of the guys from the band. I think everybody from the band is on this record except for Robbie Robertson. And he had previously written hits, obviously, for Fats Domino and Bill Haley, but somewhat, again, kind of under-heralded in his lifetime. And God, this record, I love it. It's my favorite record. I just want to play it for you guys over and over and over again. Salt and Pepper's Very Necessary. This record came out in 1993, so I had probably just turned 13 years old. It was a formative text of my youth. I probably know every word to every song on this album. These women, I feel like, really, this is going to sound really corny, but they sort of taught me a lot, I think, about independence and about relationships. And this is still a record that maybe people wouldn't think I would be into. It doesn't really sort of sync up with a lot of other things in my collection, but it is certainly treasured by me. And actually kind of a tricky record to find. A lot of these sort of early 90s hip-hop records have become somewhat coveted in recent years. So this record, really, exclamation point, the Country Blues, was one of the earliest reissues of country blues 78s on LP. This was put together in 1962, by Pete Whalen and Bill Givens. Pete Whalen being the founder and editor-in-chief of 78 Quarterly. This record is significant because it was the first time a Skip James record had ever been reissued on LP. So unless you were one of the very fortunate owners of Skip James 78, this would have been the first time most people got to hear Skip sing. But the song I played is a Henry Thomas song. He was an itinerant bluesman who recorded, I think, 23 sides for Vocalion in maybe 1927 and 1929. In many ways, sort of these records and this collection in particular kind of kicked off the whole folk renaissance of the 60s, where collectors and researchers would sort of head out into the Southeast to try to find some of these performers and see if they had any records left in them. But prior to this, I mean, this is a really great example of the kind of high stakes and vital work that 78 collectors do in terms of getting, making these records accessible to people that otherwise would never get to hear them. And I feel like Pete Whalen in particular is a sort of under-heralded figure in the whole of American music. Because God knows his stuff was sort of hugely influential from, in the sort of earliest rock and roll bands on. So this record's really cool, it means a lot to me. This is a record by a woman named Sharon Van Etten who lives and works here in New York. But this is an album that was sort of the first kind of contemporary music after I kind of fell down the 78 rabbit hole for a while. I was only listening to pre-war recordings, and then I came across Tramp by Sharon Van Etten, and I just fell in love with this record. I thought it was so sort of raw and emotional and lovely, and I got a chance to profile her. I wrote a story about her for Pitchfork a few months ago about her new record. This is still an album that means a lot to me, sort of a great kind of document, I think, of being young and living in New York and being in love and feeling kind of fucked up about it. All of her albums mean a lot to me, but I think Tramp in particular is maybe the one that sort of works on me the most. And that song, We Are Fine, which features Zach Condon from Beirut, she told me when we talked is her sort of narration of enduring a panic attack, which was not the way I had ever previously thought of that song, although it kind of works. But it's nice, it's really reassuring, it's a really cozy record for me, some sense of like, okay, this will, this like everything will pass and we'll sort of get through it. Her new record is great, but Tramp I think will always be kind of the one closest to my heart. I do think that contemporary generations of music fans are returning to vinyl in a way as a kind of antidote to that feeling of feeling sort of adrift in a sea of, millions of MP3s. I do think it's a way to make maybe a more personal connection, with music. I think, again, I'm sort of hesitant to be super nostalgic about those formats. I find myself falling into that trap all the time. I'm like, oh, the tactile experience of listening to a record, it's so magical. And I just sort of want to punch myself in the forehead. But I think it's true. I mean, I think it's true a little bit, the kind of time it takes to not only acquire a record, but to sort of put it on the turntable and flip the thing over. I think it's something people are missing a little bit. I teach music writing at NYU, and my students, I talk to them about that all the time. Their feeling of sort of disconnection from their music libraries, or their feeling of disconnection from certain artists that they love, they do seem to crave something else, some other way to sort of outwardly kind of exhibit their devotion to an artist. And I think record collecting often kind of scratches that itch in a way.